So the last presenter for today is David Gibbons. David is a principal at the National Grid's Customer Energy Management team. The team is responsible for strategy, planning, design, and development of National Grid's portfolio of commercial and industrial energy efficiency and electrification programs. The team also manages relationships with regulatory and other external stakeholders. Dave's past experience includes product development, product management, marketing, commercial operations, corporate ventures, and account management at firms including the former Cambridge Energy Research Associates, Commonwealth Energy Systems, and a division of McGraw-Hill. Mr. Gibbons holds multiple degrees in economics, a BA from the University of Maine and MA from Boston College, and he received his first naturalist certification from the Mass Audubon Society. So, Mr. Gibbons.
Thank you very much. Yeah. All right, very good. Oh, the hanger's on. Hello, everybody. Thank you for staying. A lot of what you're going to hear from me actually was touched on a little bit by a lot of the previous presenters who talked about, quote unquote, MassSave incentives. So a lot of this will be a little bit of a repeat. So I'm going to try to zip through a little bit. Also, I think Westborough TV is going to post the slides on the Westborough TV station. So it's fairly a lot of slides with lots of details. So you can always go there for reference purposes as well. Quick agenda. So people, you hear people, lots of people use the term MassSave, and who is MassSave? MassSave is no one. There is no human being that works for MassSave, but I'll get into more of that in a minute. And then I'll walk you through some of the efficiency solutions and supports that we actually do provide based upon the types of products, the type of equipment, the type of customer, and so on and so forth. And then we'll probably have lots of time for questions because I do intend to zip along a little bit. First, who's MassSave? MassSave is a brand, effectively. It's a brand under which we, National Grid, and our other utilities and one energy service provider, you'll see in the wording up there, that we market and deliver our energy efficiency programs throughout the state. So it's National Grid, it's Eversource, it is Unitil Corporation, Avangrid, which is also Berkshire Gas, they own Berkshire Gas out in the western part of the state. It is Liberty Utilities, who operates down the Fall River area. And then it's Cape Light Compact, who does electric energy efficiency work out on Cape Cod. They are the one entity within MassSave, or one of the sponsors of MassSave, as we like to refer to it, who isn't a utility. All the others of us are utilities. We also, in the context of energy efficiency, you will often hear the phrase program administrators, because we administer the energy efficiency programs in the state under a regulatory agreement from the legislature. So actually, let me go back here just once. So there is technically no person who works for MassSave. Sometimes you might ask somebody at an event, who do you work for? And they will say MassSave. That's because they have been taught to do so, because they are representing the brand on our behalf or our other program administrators' behalf. I've actually done this at an event once just to test somebody. I said, who do you work for? And they said MassSave. I said, really? Can I see your check to show me who paid you to be here today? And of course they can't do that, and I knew very well I was playing a trick on them. But so just don't understand, the program administrators, the utilities, are those sponsors behind MassSave. So we own MassSave, essentially, is what it amounts to. But it's a way for us to have consistent and comprehensive branding throughout the state, ostensibly to create less confusion in the marketplace. That's what it's for, primarily. Energy efficiency programs. So this is the other thing here to keep in mind. You notice the title here says plan priorities. That's referring to the current, which is the 2022 to 2024 3-year plan. So we as program administrators operate under a regulatory sort of construct that was started back in 2008 when the Green Communities Act was passed by the legislature. And there's been some amendments subsequent to that, up to and including, I think it was March of 2021. Is it March of 2021? Or it might have been March of this year. There was a climate bill that was passed, expanded our sort of responsibilities and our obligations as program administrators. But we essentially design and operate and implement the energy efficiency programs that are brought to all of you as residences or as business owners and operators as MassSave. That's what we do. In the latest, and we work on 3-year cycles. So every 3 years we have to put together a new plan, propose budgets, propose savings goals, etc. And then the Energy Efficiency Advisory Council, which the Department of Energy Resources is the chair, provides advice and sort of guidance about the design of those programs and budgets and the goals. And eventually we have to file a plan with the Department of Public Utilities, who has the final say. They can either support or approve everything we've filed, or they can approve some of it, or they can reject the whole thing, what have you. This time around, they approved most of what we filed at the end of last October. They came back with some other requirements that were, quite honestly, some fairly major curveballs that we then subsequently had to adjust to and file what's called a compliance file, submit a compliance filing. We did one of those in April that said, okay, we hear what you want us to do and different than what we filed. Here it is, here's our plan. They then come back with a ruling on that. There are actually some elements of what they asked us to do that still are not finalized, even though we are already, 1/3 of the way through the first year of a 3-year plan. So the clock is kind of ticking, and we're operating sort of in a hybrid, almost complete kind of way at the moment. Hopefully all the details will get worked out and approved by the DPU. But given what we know today, what was in the plan and approved thus far, there are certain things that are sort of the major focal points of what our objectives and our sort of core mission is. Electrification, which you've heard a lot about today. Electrification is just a fancy word. It basically means getting as many businesses and homeowners to electrify their space heating and cooling systems. That's what that mainly is about. There's some other adjunct kinds of electrification. Some industries have processes that can be electrified, but mainly what we're talking about is heating and cooling buildings, the spaces in them and the people that use them. That's what electrification is really about. And you'll see a lot more of that as I go on. The other focal points are workforce development. That's another thing that we were asked to focus a lot on. That's basically building enough capacity and capability to implement all the electrification that we need to in order for the state to hit its clean energy and climate plan goals. You heard earlier somebody referenced the state's goal of 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, I believe the number was. We are one of the major enablers of that outcome. We are essentially a tool in the state's toolbox to meet the state's climate goals. But without a capable and sizable enough workforce, that's never going to happen. So we're investing a lot of time and effort in doing that. Part of it in cooperation with the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, who has just gotten an extra, I think it's $12 million a year for workforce development around electrification. And then equity, another big focal point, which is basically, a lot of times you'll hear people say that there were relatively less or underserved communities historically. We like to think of it a little differently, that there's the participation rates or the adoption rates in many communities for a variety of reasons has typically been lower. That could be language barriers, that could be economic barriers, or all of those sorts of things. We are actively focused on overcoming those barriers, so disproportionately allocating resources and time and effort to make it possible for more of those lesser participating communities or individuals actually benefit from what we offer. Because as somebody mentioned earlier, in every one of your electric bills, there is a small surcharge that goes, the dollars from which go into a fund that supports the budgets that we actually use to subsidize, in effect, the investments that you as homeowners or business owners make in your buildings, in your homes to make them more energy efficient. The other thing I mentioned, when I was mentioning about the equity aspects, if you look at the left side there with the renters and English isolated folks and small businesses and what have you, all have unique challenges to participation, again, whether it's economic or language or what have you, or economics. So we're spending a lot of time and effort trying to overcome those and get greater participation from those sub-communities in our customer base. So residential customers. One thing is we're all one of those, generally speaking. So this is the most relevant piece. Residential customers take on sort of multiple flavors, right? You'll hear terminology, which I'll get into in a minute, about market rate versus moderate income versus income eligible. That's just sort of stratifying residential customers based upon their needs or their capabilities or their willingness or ability to pay for certain improvements. And so we have various offerings and delivery mechanisms to help each of those kinds of sub-communities access the resources that are available. Residential solutions encompasses what you see here on the graphic. So this is what we call coordinated delivery, which is more of a full service thing. We have people come out, look at your home, look at what the opportunities are, figure out what the package of financial supports are that are available to you, connect you with installers and so on and so forth. So it's more the full service kind of comprehensive approach. Then there's retail. So if you just have a small thing, you want to buy more efficient light bulbs, don't forget that's the cheapest, most economical energy efficiency thing you can do, is replace all of your lighting if you haven't already. So there's things like that, or if you want a Wi-Fi thermostat or a smart thermostat, little sort of transactional, product-based kinds of energy efficiency improvements can be accessed very simply through our retail, what we call our retail offerings. New construction, so if you're building a new home and you want to make sure it's going to be the most efficient home possible, there's offerings that are structured around the way the new construction industry works that we can support. And then income eligible, there is a whole set of special sort of enhanced offerings just for income eligible customers as well. It's a lot like what we do with coordinated delivery in terms of the process mechanics and the approach, but it's just the offerings are, I'll call it, richer for them. And then, of course, financing. So not only do we subsidize the initial cost of improvements, but we can also take whatever portion of the cost we don't subsidize and essentially turn that one-time capital outlay into an operating cost for you. So it spreads it out over time. Think of it as, you don't pay 100% of the cost of your car when you go and buy it. You spread some of the cost out over time. That's what our financing helps. And we essentially pay down the interest rate from participating lenders to zero for you so that you can get the advantage of spreading a fixed amount of dollars over a long period of time without the consequences of financing costs added to that. And then lastly, we spend a lot of time, as I mentioned on the first slide, workforce development, but we also want to educate customers and inform customers and provide them with advice. So to make you more intelligent, more capable consumers and purchasers and decision makers about your home and the efficiency thereof. So there's a lot of time and effort that's spent on that as well. So, residential coordinated delivery. Two flavors, as I mentioned. There's sort of market rate or moderate income. So there's, for that universe of customers. And there's income eligible. They're largely the same. Starts out with an assessment. You call them. There's on the MassSave website. It's really easy. You can find it right off the front page. Just click on residential. And it will walk you through the process or connect you to people who you can call to start the process. Starts with an audit, identify opportunities, come up with a list of recommendations, tell you what financial assistance is available, either in terms of subsidies or financing. Really simple. Whether the income eligible piece, almost identical, at least conceptually, it's just that the level of the offerings and the financial support that we offer is greater. So you can see here, 100% of the weatherization is paid for. Of eligible weatherization, 100% of the heating equipment cost is covered. So it's just the larger level of financial support that we provide for income eligible customers. But the process is largely similar. The only thing I'll highlight is at the very bottom of this, the last two sort of boxes. For market rate and moderate income customers, we have relationships, contracts with what we call lead vendors, who have been hired through a competitive bid process and work for all of the program administrators across the state. And so when we have customers who want to move forward with projects, we essentially connect them to these lead vendors who arrange the appointments, do the work, so on and so forth. When it comes to income eligible customers, we don't use that lead vendor model. We do use something that's virtually equivalent, but it's through the CAP agency. So community action planning agencies that people may or may not be familiar with. But they have relationships in the communities and with income eligible individuals, and so they are very well equipped to doing this. They've been doing this for decades for us. Some of the details about residential coordinated delivery, I talked about this a little bit. The only thing I'll highlight here is, prior to COVID, everything was on site. You'd make an appointment, somebody would show up on that date and that time, walk through your house, document what was there in terms of your HVAC system, your lighting, your water heater, etc., come up with the recommendations and so on and so forth. Largely because of COVID, and we didn't want to stop serving customers, we found ways to virtually audit your home and identify those opportunities. That is now optional. We have found that that's been a very attractive offering for customers, so many, if not most, still prefer to have a virtual audit. Think about it, it's just more convenient from a scheduling point of view. You don't actually have to be home to get it done, you just have to provide some information in order to make that work. Other than that, they'll go through, check out your heating system, look at air sealing and insulation availability and requirements, and then obviously water heating and HVAC kinds of things are part of that review. The kinds of recommendations I talked about, you will hear and you'll see on subsequent slides, a major focus for us is electrification, but also weatherization to make sure when you electrify, you're not wasting money, both in terms of the size of the equipment and therefore the cost of what you're putting into your home, but also making sure that if it's not oversized or undersized. Undersized, you're going to be cold in the winter, unfortunately. If it's oversized, it's not going to operate as efficiently as it would have otherwise, which means you're going to use more energy, have a higher operating cost than you would otherwise. So right sizing your home is what you use weatherization for. So we're offering lots more. We've done weatherization for years, but now we're actually sort of cranking up the incentives for weatherization as well. So it's a major focal point going forward. And here we go. So here's the weatherization piece. So for rental units, 2 to 4 family, multifamily, or for moderate income, 100% of eligible, approved, I'll call it insulation, is paid for through our programs. If you are market rate or moderate or owner occupied 2 to 4, then it's 75% of the insulation costs are covered. That's pretty astonishing. I actually myself, about a year and a half ago now, probably, I actually took advantage of this and had some of the sill plate in my basement weatherized. I noticed it immediately. I don't track the dollars that it impacted me, but I could, comfort-wise, if I'm standing in front of my windows at the edge of my house, in a room in my house, I could feel the difference. The other piece I mentioned, with the right sizing, the $500 bonus for weatherization when it's done coincident with installing a heat pump. So basically saying, we want to make sure that you make the smartest choice in terms of the heat pump that you install, and as such, we want you to weatherize first, or at least simultaneously with, and therefore we're willing to offer even more for that. So there's a $500 bonus when you do the two things together. The other one is, like we do with lots of things, more on the residential side of the house, is we actually contract with manufacturers or supply houses to get pricing on a lot of the efficiency, whether it's light bulbs, whether it's insulation, what have you, so that you as a consumer don't have to worry about whether you're getting charged, whether the installer that you're choosing to work with is like cranking up, marking up the cost of the products themselves, to some absurd amount, which is essentially, taking away from the subsidy that we're providing. We actually negotiate those prices in advance, so there's no gamesmanship or I hate to call it that, but price gouging potentially that would go on there. So it's a consumer protection kind of thing that we do. In older homes, so if you think about downtown, where we have more on Church Street or Main or what have you, where we've got older homes, you can run into some pretty amazing things, and because we want to, that are particularly impediments to weatherization. So we will often pay for the cost of overcoming what we call pre-weatherization barriers. So if you ever see knob and tube wiring, that's always a fun one. It exists in still to this day exists in some older homes. You can have asbestos issues or moisture or what have you. So we will actually provide financial support to overcome those barriers, in addition to the subsidies that we provide directly for the more energy efficient products and equipment. Moderate income, very, very similar, obviously. Just the dollars go up a little bit, and I'm not going to go through this too much, but the only thing to think about with moderate income is there's an income verification process that has to happen up front to make sure you are in fact eligible for the moderate income level incentives. But the process is basically the same. The incentives are a little bit richer than they are for a market rate residential customer. And you can see on the far right there, as I mentioned, heat pumps are sort of the topic of the day. What we call the built environment. So whether it's a building like this or the town hall or your home, is a major, major source of greenhouse gas emissions because of the heating requirements in those buildings. And so the future is definitely heat pumps, for sure. So we're putting an enormous amount of emphasis on and have greatly increased the incentives and subsidies that are available for heat pumps. Income eligible to coordinate delivery. As I said, process mechanics are basically the same. The offerings are at least categorically the same. The levels of financial support are higher. And the implementation process is different. Here it's with the CAP agencies rather than with our lead vendors. Here's just a chart. You can refer to it. It'll be in the slides that are posted, but this tells you what the income levels are for the size, based on size of household, to qualify for the income eligible levels of incentives in the process. As I said, 100% of the upgrades, which is sponsored by the program administrators, otherwise known as the MassSave sponsors, for all things like insulation and air sealing, HVAC, including the heat pumps, appliance replacements. We've done refrigerator appliance replacements for years. We'll do water heaters, etc., so on and so forth. And here's the pre-weatherization barrier mitigation, which we also cover 100% for income eligible customers. I mentioned that earlier. I won't go into the details there. This is the one, sort of the transaction-based kind of thing that I mentioned earlier. So retail, if you just want to find more efficient light bulbs or a smart thermostat, Wi-Fi thermostat, whatever it happens to be, there's another way to get there through what we call residential retail. So there's online application forms. There's actually an online marketplace. You see the URL there. So it's literally, at point of purchase, you get it at a discount because we've negotiated contracts with suppliers to offer them at below market rates. In the background, we're paying those suppliers to discount them on the marketplace, and that's to make those available to you. But that's the quick and dirty. Like I say, it's kind of transactional, product specific, rather than going through an assessment. We have to schedule and look at the entire range of opportunities. And now the heat pumps. So somebody actually, I forgot which presenter it was, actually had an equivalent version of this on the screen. So again, I won't go through it too much. A couple things to keep in mind. There's language here. What matters is, well, let's break it down. There's different kinds of heat pumps. You've heard about a number of them. Fales has ground source heat pumps. I believe the person from Endless Energy was talking about mainly what's called air source heat pumps, which is by far the most common heat pump in any kind of building, whether it's a home or a small business or even larger businesses. They're very efficient. They're very, very modular. They work great in most spaces. They also happen to be the least expensive kind of heat pump, and also the most common. So somebody mentioned Mitsubishi. Mitsubishi actually has a huge training center that we had a number of National Grid folks go to on Thursday. It's in Southborough, and they require all of their contractors to go through their training before they get. Somebody made a comment about platinum or whatever they're diamond contractors. They get that part of the way they get that status is by going through Mitsubishi's own training on their equipment and so on and so forth. But so air source, the other primary version in a residential context is ground source. It's much less common. It's much more involved. It's much more expensive up front, but it is by far the most efficient way to heat your home. It just, you have to look at it from like a lifetime or life cycle cost point of view. If you're not going to be in your home for a long, long time, it's probably not a good idea, unless the cost doesn't matter to you. If all you care about is sort of comfort and efficiency and clean, the cleanliness or the lack of emissions, then ground source is fabulous, spectacular. It is just, like I say, more complicated and more expensive up front. The other thing to keep in mind is this, you'll see the terminology here about partial versus whole home. Somebody, again, one of the previous presenters talked about some people use heat pumps just for essentially cooling in the summer and then sort of shoulder season or spring, fall heating, and then have an existing system, natural gas, whatever it happens to be, as their primary system in the winter. And when the, sorry about that. And when the temperatures get warm enough, the heat pump will be used for a little bit of the load, but not all of it. So it's refer to the existing system as providing supplemental heating during the coldest days of the year. Because what happens is, if you look at the performance of a heat pump in terms of the BTUs in per BTUs out, that conversion efficiency drops off precipitously when you get down to basically below 17 degrees. That's typical. The different makes and models have a little different cutover point, but around there. So we're trying to remember, our job is to get people to adopt the most efficient equipment possible, so they use the least amount of energy to get the amount of comfort or service from whatever they have in their home that's using energy. And so we're trying to, if we use some of those heat pumps in those coldest days of the year, it turns out they're actually less efficient, quite a bit less efficient than even a high efficiency natural gas furnace or boiler, for instance. So that, from our point of view, is a suboptimal outcome. But we do encourage folks to either, whether they're looking at a partial displacement, meaning shoulder season plus summer cooling, or a full displacement where it's year round. We're encouraging both of those kinds of projects and educating customers about what the differences are, what they have to look out for. Basically what it amounts to is you need a system that has that capability to operate efficiently through those coldest months, if that's the way you choose to go. And there are lots of them, and they're getting better every single day. I was talking this past week with folks, a company called Train, which is probably the biggest HVAC manufacturer or supplier in New England these days. They do more commercial work than residential. They have a whole new line of products that's coming out, I think, in June. That's going to be much, much more efficient than just the stuff you could buy from them today. And a lot of it is based upon the criteria that we have established for our incentives. Like, we set minimum efficiency levels for the equipment that we'll incentivize. And so a lot of the manufacturers are actually changing their production practices and their design standards so that more and more of their equipment will meet the specs that we're mandating for our subsidies. So it's like, sort of this circular symbiotic kind of thing that goes on. But it's improving literally day by day, month by month in terms of the efficiency. Here's whole home, how you go about it. Well, I talked about this a little bit. You do have to go through an assessment, get the weatherization recommendations, then go through the installation. We have a network of installers that we work with regularly and make available to customers who don't already have a contractor that they want to work with. Again, the Endless Energy folks are one of those contractors, actually, but there are many, many, many others. Partial home, there's largely to protect the customers from a bad outcome. We do have some requirements for partial home. Like, we want to make sure that that there are what are called integrated controls installed with the heat pump, which automatically decides, in effect, when the system is going to switch between the heat pump and your other conventional system for heating purposes, because we don't want people being ending up with a cold home or uncomfortable home. Actually, most of these installers don't like that either. Callbacks are the death of a contractor. It's a complete sunk cost for them. But we've set some standards to make it more obvious to customers what they should be looking for from their contractors. The $500 bonus, this I mentioned earlier for weatherization. That's happening in May, so that's coming momentarily. I don't want to completely, not mention anything but heat pumps. Really super high efficiency gas furnaces and boilers are still something that we provide subsidies for. Those subsidies have been shrinking over the years because the delta between what a typical home might have for an efficient furnace and what the highest level of efficiencies available are has been shrinking, and we're trying to basically get customers to do more than they might otherwise on their own. So we're only trying to motivate at the margin, and that margin has been shrinking, therefore our incentives have been shrinking as well. But there's still, look, if you still want a super high efficiency condensing gas boiler, we have incentives for that as well. Water heaters, standard kind, your storage, your on-demand tankless, and also very new, the heat pump water heaters at the top there. There's fairly generous incentives for those as well. If you're considering a heat pump for heating and cooling, you should and you have a relatively old, 5+ year old water heater, you should talk to that contractor at the same time about your water heater. There might be some practical and economic considerations that would make it worth just choosing to do both at the same time. Lastly, as I mentioned, or for context, we view what we do as we provide sort of information, education, advice on the one hand, and we provide financial support on the other. One of the things we're trying to do to help the market electrify more quickly is provide lots more educational resources. So we have better informed buyers, if you will. So before, and somebody mentioned how important it is for people to start thinking today about decisions they might have to make 5, 10, 15 years down the road about the heating systems, so they're ready when the time comes. Because if it dies tomorrow, you're not going to do the research. You're just going to get a one-for-one, like-for-like kind of replacement. So we're trying to educate the market as much as we possibly can, as fast as we possibly can. So we're making lots and lots more resources available. Was it Bob from, I believe his name was, or Jeff from the Smart Heat Alliance does some of that work, through their organization? Yeah. We're augmenting that as well. Here's some of the retail rebates that I mentioned. Again, this will all be online. Financing, the Endless Energy gentleman mentioned this, for, again, approved upgrades, 0% financing for up to 7 years to a maximum of $25,000 is available for lots of different things. And then the only thing I'll say about small businesses is it's kind of the same. We'll come out and do an audit of your small business, identify efficiency upgrade opportunities, provide recommendations, including the sort of the financial support and the economics of that. Generally speaking, it's 70% of the cost of the projects is what we'll provide for incentives. Really simple. And here's it's all the standard stuff. It's lighting, it's HVAC, it's water heating, it's those kinds of things. And I think that's about it. I've got some contacts here, some of my colleagues both within National Grid and at Eversource. We are at National Grid is the electric provider in Westborough, so we are the electric program administrator for Westborough. Eversource is the natural gas provider, therefore the natural gas program administrator in Westborough. So if you have any questions, these email addresses will be available to you in the presentation. And the first step, if you don't know what to do, either email one of these people or go on the MassSave website and look around a little bit, and then there's contact information there as well. And that is that. That was a lot. My apologies for the speed reading version of that. You know what is it? Right at 5. Yeah. Okay. So you can either go have dinner or you can ask questions. No, just kidding. If anybody has questions, I'm here. You can ask them now or as I'm walking back up. I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay. Great.
I did want to make one comment that at least in your experience, the sooner people get onto these incentive programs, the more benefits they get because they're generally higher and then they go down on a sliding scale. Is that
true? So it's true. So when something is a new kind of solution or it's a relatively, or the market adoption rate has been lower to date, we will generally, our job is to accelerate adoption. beyond the rate at which it would naturally occur. That's all we're here for. We're one of the state's biggest carrots, to use somebody else's analogy from the beginning of the day. We are the biggest carrot the state has to sort of get people to do things they might not otherwise do of their own volition. So yes, at the beginning, like with any market, you know, if you're in a business, you're trying to drive those early adopters, or the next wave, if you will. And so we do offer really high incentives at the beginning of a market sort of development. And then over time, where it becomes more standard for people to, or more common for people to choose that pathway themselves, those incentives will in fact tail off. The state has such a huge stake in electrifying the built environment, whether it's commercial or residential, that we are not likely to reduce the incentives anytime soon, at least not for heat pumps. Some other things are definitely declining. So traditional heating systems, natural gas furnaces and boilers, you know, they're already way down from what they were. I guarantee in the next year or two they'll decline further. Lighting incentives have declined almost every year. But you know, so that is absolutely true. It's a little bit of get it while it's hot. You know, it's not like we're trying to like scare you that the opportunity is going to go away, because actually the cost from the manufacturers or the distributors or what have you is also falling over time a little bit. So we're trying to like, you know, follow that curve down so we're not offering more than is necessary. But yes, the incentives do go down over
The
time.
government's incentive is to dispel lack of information, basically.
Yeah,
to
we
spend more.
correct the market information, you know, inefficiency is what we do. That, you know, people either don't know about or aren't willing to adopt things at the rate that as a matter of public policy, the state government decides is, you know, optimal, and we are there to fix that imperfection.
Right.
That's what we do.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you, everybody.
It was wonderful.
Have a great day.
Wonderful. That was good. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.